You're listening to Head to Head, a Star Wars podcast. Two fans, two generations, all things Star Wars. Begins now.
All right, well, hello, everybody. I'm Eric Vansel, and as you can see, I'm by myself tonight. Not sure exactly what's going on. Daryl, maybe he's having a technical issue or something. Hasn't really gotten a hold of me for it yet, but hey, he might pop on at some point. Hopefully he does. But tonight, we've got some stuff to talk about. We've got episode 3. I'm sorry, episode 3. What am I thinking? Episode 10. I think I'm thinking of Tales of the Jedi because we're also reviewing that too. So, we have episode 10 of the series Andor. So, yeah, this one was actually kind of intense. So, for anybody that's been following this and has been following our review, we talked about how this was basically a series of trilogies. And of course, some of the people that were chatting, I think it might have been Voyager, not sure. But somebody actually corrected me and said, no, even though it's a series of trilogies, it was actually 7 was a standalone. So it was a bridge. So you had episodes 1, 2, and 3, 4, 5, and 6. Each one of those were trilogies. And then you had basically episode 7, which was a standalone, and then 8, 9, and 10. And these are basically becoming known as the prison trilogy. So this is basically the last 3 episodes. We've seen Andor's been in prison, and there's just a lot of really cool things about this one. Now, I know a lot of you guys actually did not like, you weren't too into the first episode, which was episode 8. But I remember everybody sort of universally picked it up with episode 9, and of course, that one was pretty spectacular. There was some really great moments in it, really great acting in it. It was just, overall, I think it was just a really cool episode. And personally, I think that episode 10, which is essentially the conclusion, because remember, this is a 12-episode season, and what's going to happen is the next 2 episodes are now going to be the finale episode. So rather than go the 3-episode story arc route, they're going to just do 2 episodes. So I think that that's going to be a pretty cool thing, actually. But as should surprise nobody that's been following this review so far, I've got some notes. I do have some notes. So, let's get into this, and like I said, hopefully Daryl maybe shows up, I don't know. The whole thing opens basically with this really extended conversation between Kino and Cassian Andor. Now, for those of you guys who don't know, Kino basically is Andy Serkis's character, and he, to me, is the definite MVP of this episode. I switched back to this shot, you guys could see. This guy is just, he just delivered it on all fronts on this one. I thought that it was just an absolute incredible performance, and pretty much this whole conversation that they're having is that Andor keeps saying, look, we have to act tomorrow because there's just no way that we're going to be able to have another shot. There's no way that there's going to be a better time. The way that the guards are situated and everything like that, it's a really good time to act. And on top of that, the other problem is that they also know that since they're trying to start to kill off prisoners now to keep them quiet, you just have a really, really crazy situation in this prison. And you can actually understand why somebody like Kino would be a little bit apprehensive to just go ahead and do this, because it's like anything else, right? It's one thing to talk about it, but it's quite another thing to actually do it, to actually carry something out. How many times have you guys maybe, made plans, oh, we should do this or we should do that, and it's some spectacular thing, But then when it actually comes time to move on it, you become a little bit apprehensive because, again, it's one thing, like a lot of times people say things like, I really should quit my job. I mean, there's another opportunity. Maybe I should quit my job and things will be better. And they might. But the thing is, if you've been at that job for a period of time, it's one thing to talk about it and get yourself amped up for it, but to actually write that resignation letter and to hand it to HR or whoever and really go through with it. I mean, that's just a crazy, crazy thing. So this is where I think that Kino is truly apprehensive about leaving this place because, yeah, it's one thing to talk about it, but it's quite another thing to do it. All right, so now we have Daryl with us, finally. Let's make sure your mic's working, right?
Check.
All right, so it's working. So, again, this opening conversation where Andor's basically saying, look, we gotta go, and Kino's basically like, I don't know. I think that's a lot where it's coming from. And so you have to take into consideration these things, but at the same time, Andor's making a lot of really good points. Like, look, there's not going to be a better time to do this. So, obviously, talking about the opening scene. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, this is your time, I guess, to weigh in on any thoughts from that.
Yeah, I mean, the opening scene was, very important, because it's really the point where Andor really kind of has to kind of fully push Kino over the edge and to say, look, you got it. I mean, we're not getting out. This machine is going to keep recycling itself. I mean, there's no better time than now than to, we got a new person coming on the floor. We've already I've kind of scoped it out with, some of the other people. Look, man, we kind of have to take it by force, and yes, there'll be some casualties along the way. But I mean, either you're gonna die, and you're either gonna die in here, or you're gonna die trying to be free. Which one would you rather do? And it's kind of when you put those choices into perspective, it's kind of like, yeah,
well, and not only that,
say.
Right, and you can actually feel the tension, between all the prisoners and stuff like that, because obviously this plan has been somewhat shared. I mean, the scene goes on for a while. One of the things that I really appreciated overall about this episode was the fact that, unlike a couple of the episodes, I don't remember if it was 8 or 9. I think it was 9. I think it was the last episode where basically what had happened was they kept, in my opinion, they didn't let the scenes breathe. It's like they would do the prison thing for like 30 seconds and then go to something else and then come back to that. And I mean, it was one of those things that I think that they were trying to move the episode, but to me it was a little bit jarring. It was like, I mean, no, I want to stay on this for a second, guys. I mean,
had a very Rise of Skywalker vibe to it.
Kind of, but at least the Rise of Skywalker had full scenes, I mean, it moved quickly, but at least it was full scenes. This is just, it was almost like they had the entire, say, prison scene, and then they had the entire Empire scene with, say, Cyril and Deidre or something. And what they did was they just kind of cut it up and interspersed it. And it's like, I just felt like they could have actually let that breathe a little bit instead of it being disjointed. Whereas this one, that's precisely what they did. They actually let the whole thing breathe. They let the scenes be complete. I mean, there's, obviously we'll get to them a little bit later, but you have 2 fantastic monologues in this thing. One of them being Kino. Like I said, Kino's probably the MVP of this episode. And then, of course, the one at the end, toward the end, with Luthen. And it really sets up pretty much what this show has been about. And that's the kind of thing that could not have happened during the last episode. And I don't just mean, I'm not talking about the story part of it. I'm talking about the way that they cut it, the way, the pacing and everything. you wouldn't have been able to do that in the last episode. So I really totally appreciated the fact that they actually did that. You had this whole thing, and to me, you really felt the tension more because of that. Especially with Kino and Cassian debating back and forth, And you could see both sides of that. Because, look, moving on is scary. I mean, you have to look at it from Kino's perspective. He just found out that this whole thing was for nothing. He thought he was going to be out and free after a couple hundred more shifts or whatever, and he was trying to be cool to his people, but yet motivate them so they could get out a little bit quicker or whatever. And then, of course, in the last episode, he finds out that's not true at all. Basically, all they do is they either move you to another prison or they kill you. And, this basically shows, once again, the brutality of the Empire and everything else. So, I mean, I was really happy that they, again, let these things breathe and let it go on.
Yeah. I mean, with Kino, he's a very conflicted character because he's, on one hand, he, like you said, he wants to be cool, but then on the other hand, he's kind of trying to look out for himself in a way, and just just do his thing, and look, I'm doing my time, don't bother me, and
right.
do whatever you do, and we'll be all good. But then once you come to the realization that, like, look, this is what it is, and when you're faced with that, and you're trying to be optimistic, in that situation, because you're locked down, you're like, okay, look, why wouldn't they keep me? Why wouldn't they let me go? Because once again, like you said, this is under the rule of the Empire, and I think he still kind of had the mindset of the Republic a little bit. Like, okay, see, the Republic, that would make more sense, but this is the Empire. They don't care about that. It's you're just another mindless being to them.
Well, that's why I
And
love that line. I'm pretty sure it was Andor had said it. I'm not sure it was in that first scene when he basically says power doesn't panic. I mean,
yeah,
that
exactly.
was cool, and that pretty much goes into what you're talking about right now. It's like, look,
exactly.
man,
It's like, why else would they be freaking out if they weren't, afraid of something? Like, obviously, like, the reason why they're doing all this is because there's a chink in the armor, and like right now we have to expose that. And so now when you finally kind of see them, kind of that tension they had when the guy starts to come down on the lift, and he starts, it's just kind of, of course, Cassian excuses himself to go to the restroom yet again to open this pipe up, which I still don't quite understand what that was for.
Well,
I mean,
basically,
but
it was shorting out and everything that hot floor. It was doing something to that. That was the whole reason why, because as you notice, when they tried to activate it again, it wouldn't go on. He was basically trying to short it out.
Okay, because it was like electrocuting people too, so that's why I was like,
yeah,
you kind of made it worse, and for some people, but
well, it's almost like a necessary
jump
evil.
On the table.
I mean, look, out of all these prisoners, not everybody's going to make it out. I mean, it's kind of one of those things that, Ronaldo's joining us. Hey, Ronaldo.
Ronaldo.
It's one of those things that you just, it's like, look, there's going to be casualties, and that's another thing I really liked about this episode, was that it was very realistic in its whole escape plan type of thing, where all your favorite characters didn't make it out. A lot of people didn't make it out. It wasn't like, the heroes triumphed, because it is true on one hand that part of what they were afraid of, the Empire I'm talking about, is the fact that they knew they didn't have enough people to contain all these guys. Right. But what it was they were counting a lot on the technology. They had the hot floor. Fear. They basically had a lot of technological things in place that did give them the upper hand. But what Andor was trying to get across to everybody, and then, of course, Kino, being the leader, was able to pretty much explain this, I guess, is that, look, if we actually overwhelm them, they can't stop us.
Yeah, it's more of them, it's more us than them, and
right.
You just got to fight to the death, pretty much. The other, and this is one of the things I notice about Andor is that because of his observance and being so aware of what's around him, who's around him, he knew from the get-go that I have to get this guy Kino on my side. Because it's like, okay, because you got to wonder, like, okay, well, if this guy, why was he pressing to get Kino so hard when I could get everybody? Like, okay, well, fine, I'll just talk to everybody else, and you know, and you could tell that he kind of manipulated some other people because one black guy that was there, he was already kind of talking to him about some stuff, so he already kind of had made some friends, so to speak, in while he was in there. But Kino was the key because he knew that Kino has leadership qualities and abilities, and he know people will listen to him.
Yep.
So he figured, like, okay, I can come up with a plan, but I need you to get everybody on board or on program, if you will. So that's the
Well,
whole thing that I thought that was really brilliant from Andor's perspective. It's like, okay, I got to get this guy to see what I'm seeing. And once he understands that, then I think that now everything and everybody else kind of fell in line, because when he gave that whole speech, he's like, the rumors are true. He said, we're not getting out of here. So let's just make it look good.
yeah, and that's pretty much it. And of course, the other thing that was really cool is the fact that you did have, and I can't remember, I wish I knew this guy's name. I'm so bad with this stuff. But they did have that one guy that Andor was basically paired with in Rogue One with this the whole time. So I mean, you knew he was going to get out. Oh man, I wish I could describe the guy even. But he was basically in Rogue One. In fact, I had to double check cuz I'm like, I think that's a guy from Rogue One, and sure enough, that's one of the Easter eggs. It was basically one of the characters that Andor sort of served with in Rogue One ends up being in that little group. That's probably how they met and how they eventually hooked up. And I would assume maybe that's how he gets the Empire. I don't know. I mean, I do know that there's certain things that they've actually released. Like, there's some information. Like, in Season 2 of Andor, we're going to get the Yavin 4 base, which obviously featured pretty heavily in Rogue One as well. So, I mean, and I'm sure that, I mean, if it could happen maybe in the next 2 episodes because this is the finale arc, but I'm sure K2SO is going to make his appearance in Season 2. The finale might give us a little bit of a window on how maybe he captured K2SO and reprogrammed him, but I'm sure like a lot of more of the Rogue One connection, because we do know that the series is going to end pretty much at Rogue One. I have a feeling that the whole Rogue One connection is going to be pushed a little bit more in Season 2. So,
Absolutely.
Let's get to some of these chats, because they're coming in. Oh, yeah, Dwight Melshi. Melshi is the guy from Rogue One. And Dwight also says water and electricity doesn't mix. The water was to short out the floor. Yep, that's what we thought. Ronaldo says this episode was amazing. I love Kino's journey in this. Yeah, I mean, he was pretty much right up there with, Bill Pullman from Independence Day, and a lot of these other like big speeches that you get pretty much. I mean, that was where that was coming from. And that, again, I totally appreciated all of that. So yeah, everybody is basically greeting each other here. And then David says, hello, gentlemen. You mentioned Andor has been preserving his own life thus far because he's not on board with the rebellion. Is he still acting in self-preservation, or is he starting to transition?
Great question. See, the thing is, right now we don't know, because he's only had interaction with the rebellion once, really.
Yeah.
And that's that whole mission that when they, did the whole heist.
Yeah, the
After that, he's
Aldhani
been
thing.
incarcerated. Yeah, the Aldhani thing. So now that he's incarcerated, he's been incarcerated like majority of the rest of the season, so he really hasn't had a chance to get into. Now when he gets out, like the next 2 episodes, we'll see how he kind of bounces back, and if he's going to link up with the rebellion at the end of this season, or is it going to be at the start of the second season. We're not entirely sure on that, but that is a great question. I think what you're starting to see though is his ability to lead, his ability to do what's right, and willing to take. I mean, he's always kind of been that guy where he's willing to do what's necessary to complete the job, and that's why Luther wanted him to begin with, because he saw that in him to begin with, that he has the capacity to, like do what must be done in a way. So I think what we're seeing is the maturation of Andor into becoming someone, because if Rogue One, he was like a prominent guy, like he was like one of the main, because he had to go get Jen, he had to go get, so he was one of the main utilities, if you will, of that time. So I think that is that he's getting those skills and that experience in this type of situation, to now that he can transition, hopefully by season 2.
Yeah, and I agree completely. I mean, I think he's still totally acting out of self-preservation, actually. It's not, sure, he's trying to help the people that he's with, but he's always kind of been like that. But for the most part, he's basically allying himself with these people for a united purpose. Pretty much like how we want you guys to ally to hit that like button and to subscribe to the channel. See, we can weave that in there. Yeah, I mean, absolutely. Much like, they want to get out of prison, we want you guys to hit that like button and, hit the subscribe button and notification bell and all that stuff. But, I mean, yeah, it's one of those things where even though I think you hit the nail on the head where he's starting to show his leadership capabilities, but I think he's still in that self-preservation mode because he's still just trying to get out. It's not like he's doing this for the good of everybody, although, again, you do see a little bit of that, but he's always been, somewhat cool about that.
But what this does do is reinvigorates even the more his hatred for the Empire.
Yes.
And that's what's going to probably ultimately push him to the rebellion, because he's going to hate them so much to the point where he's like, I have to take them down. If I can be a part of ripping everything they have apart, so be it, because I can't stand them.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, even, because obviously this isn't a play-by-play really, but when they actually switched to, what's that planet called? Like Ferrix or something like that, or whatever, where they were on. I mean, you saw like those stormtroopers just kind of standing around the town or whatever. It's like they really look ominous and threatening. This is the first time, I think, in any Star Wars related thing to where the stormtroopers really, you got a sense of dread and fear by seeing them. They weren't as cartoony as they were, I think, in some of the other stuff. You really did kind of get chills from that. Ronaldo says, and how great was Andy Serkis in this? He was great. I mean, absolutely.
Yeah, he did a phenomenal job. That whole scene when they took the control room, that was just.
Well, that was just. Yeah.
And it's just like first of all, watching the Empire kind of before you even get to the control, the process of seeing them get to the control room, watching the Empire cower behind those doors.
Oh, I know.
We've never seen that.
No.
If you think about it, you've never seen that in Star Wars, where they're like literally hiding because they know like it's way too many of them. And so they're just like, look, let's just let these like forget it. Like, we've already lost. So let's just try to keep themselves safe behind these these doors. And they had their little weapons, but like, And that's another thing. They're not just running around, but they got weapons too. They got
I
like
know.
whatever those torque wrenches they're using. They got guns
Well,
now.
at
They got
first, but
cattle
yeah, then
prods.
when they started raiding the whole, weapons cache, and now everybody's got a gun. I mean, they basically knew, all right, it's
Yeah.
hopeless. And that's it. And that goes back to the earlier point that I was making, where it's like, look, you basically had the advantage as long as these guys, because, I mean, if you think about it, the technology that they had, they did legitimately have the advantage. All they had to do was
Mhm.
activate those like hot floors, and that was
Mhm.
it. They basically they had the stun. They could cut them off. I mean, they can keep them more or less separated. I mean, there was a lot of advantages that they had, but what was brilliant about this little plan that they concocted, which is why Andor again in the beginning was telling like, look, we've got to act because we don't know when the next opportunity we're going to have. And everything was basically coming together in a perfect storm to make it possible. And Cassian knew that. And once he was able to convince Kino of that, then it was a done deal. But it did show you when they were cowering behind the stuff that all it took was, just that. So
One little moment. Yeah.
yep. So Dwight basically says, I think once they cost his mother her life, he will be full on board. That would be 2 sets of parents. Yeah, I mean,
Mm.
I could see that
Yep.
too. You do forget about that. Marva, I think was her name.
Marvel. Yep.
I think that, yeah, if that happens, because I know they already captured her, didn't they? I mean, I remember.
Yeah.
So if they
Mhm.
do end up killing her, then yeah, that would probably seal the deal. That's a good point. Ronaldo says, I think the second season will end just moments before Rogue One. Yes, it has been confirmed to do that. Tony Gilroy himself basically said in an interview that this series was going to butt right up against Rogue One. So that that's going to be the case. Ronaldo goes on to say a couple of things, and it gave me that feeling that there are good people in the Empire that just want to do their job. That's actually a good point too, because if you look at those guys that were, fiddling with the controls, and to Kino and Cassian's credit, they didn't kill them. I mean, Andor is not just afraid to just, you're no longer useful and pull the trigger. I mean, for once,
honestly, I thought he was.
I know, I did too. I totally thought that was going to happen. I was like, oh man, these poor guys. But I mean, if you look at their attitude, yeah, they weren't like these evil dudes or anything like that. They're just like, look, this is what I do. I got some vacation days coming up, and I heard Camino is nice this time of year. I don't know.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's the thing though, and if you look at any job, right, you have people who are generally cool. They're just, look, this is my job. I'm not here to, even if their job is to do something uncomfortable. Like, let's just say, you illegally park somewhere and somebody's got to tow your car. Like, the tow truck driver doesn't have any malicious intent towards you. He doesn't know you. He doesn't care. He's just, look, this is what the police told me to take your car. I'm just doing what the police officers tell me because, they're the ones authorizing this. Hey, take it up with them, basically.
Yeah.
But then you do have those guys who are jerks and
Oh,
who
yeah.
who you give them a little bit of power, they run rampant with it. And so you can see that you could tell the ones who had that and the ones who didn't. And these guys in the command center, it's like, okay, look, whatever you want. Dude,
Well, my
it's cool.
favorite
Like,
thing,
I'm not
what I loved
trying to, I want to go home.
right. And in that first scene, when it's like, well, turn it off, but it'll take months to restart or whatever. It's like, I'm sitting there thinking like, yeah, I don't really think they care, man. Of course, before I could even think that, they're like, just turn it off, or whatever. I mean, but then
You
again,
look at them like really?
yeah, like, dude, seriously, you might want to just do what
what's
they
happening
say.
here.
Yeah, right. I mean, 2 + 2 does equal 4 sometimes. Ronaldo, of course, brings up, another heart-wrenching point. He says, my heart broke when Kino said he couldn't swim.
Man, no, that was a moment because it's just kind of like
This is another one of those discussion moments, you know?
yeah, it was just like, okay, they're finally there, Kino, and then they realize that they don't have a way off this thing. They have to jump and swim away. And it's just like, that wasn't a short swim either, man. I mean, they're not like just off the water, like they're miles away. And even Cassian turned back to look at him, and it was cool because you could see the kind of the friendship and the bond they created,
Mm-hmm.
because they were kind of antagonistic towards each other in a little bit more so Kino towards Andor, because I guess he's already saw Andor as a problem, but
Yeah.
but now they've kind of like formed their own, and he kind of sees like, okay, this guy's actually cool. He's really, he didn't have to do this, but look at us now, like we're inches away from freedom. And then he can't go the full mile with them.
Yeah, you know what it
But
reminded me of? It totally was like the ending beach scene with him and Jen Urso.
yeah,
It very much
but
mirrored that. And a lot of the same circumstances, actually, except, Andor actually made it out of this one, but...
yeah. And the thing is, though, it was kind of in a way satisfying, because it's like, okay, I can't make this journey with you, but I've allowed everybody else to make the journey and continue on. This is my sacrifice that I'm just giving for everybody else. And and that
Well,
was kind of
yeah,
a real powerful moment, especially
it
after that
was.
speech that he made.
Yeah,
You
yeah,
know.
the speech, I mean, there was, and again, the two big speeches in this thing were, of course, his and Luthen's speech toward the end. And I mean, they were both, usually you only get one of those kind of speeches in the whole
Hmm.
series. This time, you actually get two in one episode. And they were
Hmm.
extremely compelling. I mean, honestly, we could probably almost do an entire show just breaking down those two speeches, because they really were fantastic. And it does show you a little bit about where Kino was coming from, and just a lot of the mindset. Now, of course, if it were me, right, I probably would have, like, I don't know, maybe I would have tried a little bit harder to maybe find a ship or a flotation device or something on the prison. Like, okay, yeah, see you guys. Okay, now I'm gonna go try to
Hmm.
find something. Maybe I'm not gonna quite say, hey, sorry guys, I can't go with you. It's like, yeah, okay, can't go with you. Now I'm gonna go and try to find something. But
Hmm.
we don't really know what Kino's fate is actually at the end of this thing. And some of the things that were really cool about that speech were when he talked about, when Cassian was basically alluding to the fact that he would rather die fighting,
Hmm.
right? When Kino actually repeated that in his speech. And then,
Yeah.
of course, another thing that, happens in these episodes, at least the last few, is that they always somehow work the title of the episode into the
Hmm.
dialogue. And they did keep repeating the one way out. And of course, when the prisoners started chanting one way out, and they were, I mean, that was
Yeah.
just a really crazy,
Chilling. It was like a
yeah,
chilling but warm feeling. Like, that's
yeah.
it's kind of like, all right, this is like their battle cry,
It was
for
totally their
that
battle
moment.
cry. Yeah, I mean, it was unbelievable how well done that was, because honestly, that could have been just another cliche. I mean, how many times have we seen scenes like this? You know, prisoners rise up and, overtake their guards and do, but this was done in such a unique, thoughtful. This is one of the reasons why you and I have always said that this truly is Star Wars for adults.
Well, this one was very moving, and
Very moving.
um this is where the writing comes into
Mhm.
play.
Yep.
This is when you talk about good writing,
Oh.
because once again, you have this moment where, because really technically he kind of gave like a mini speech when they were still in in their little dorm pods or whatever, right?
Yeah, exactly. That is
So he
true.
kind of
That's
gave
true.
his first speech right there. That was kind of
Hmm.
like a little warm up, and then it was like, okay, even as he was telling everybody, like he was still leading everybody, climb, do what you can, get out of here. And okay, when they finally take the command center, it was funny because it kind of reminded me of Cyril, when Cyril had to give the speech to the men on the ship. He didn't know what to say. That's the same thing
Yes,
that
that's
Kino
true.
had.
Yeah.
And it was funny because Cassian was like, "That's it. That's all you got." Like the levity in that moment was funny because it was very Star Wars. Like it wasn't like a Marvel thing. It was very like that was almost like something Han Solo would say to someone like, "Really?
Well,
That's it?"
this will mean something to you, because we all work at the same place, right? But Adam and Ken and I were talking this morning, and Ken's not really into Star Wars.
Hmm.
He kind of likes it, but he's not really into it. Of course, Adam is. And
Right.
Adam had mentioned about how he has to catch up on Andor because he hasn't seen the last couple episodes. And then Ken was talking about it, and I said, for people who don't like Star Wars, I would probably use this show as a gateway to Star Wars now. And we were telling him that this really is a political spy thriller. There's really very little Star Wars in it, to be honest. I mean, it's set
Hmm.
in the Star Wars universe, and it does have some of the, I guess you could say, Star Wars window dressing or whatever, but it's not. It doesn't feel like a Star Wars show the way the other ones do.
Right.
And so, yeah, I think a lot of that is the intelligent writing. All right, so let's get to some of more of these chats here. David says, "We're learning about the arranged marriage of Mon Mothma." Okay, so now we're switching to Mon Mothma. Old Mon Mothma stuff was really good too.
Oh yeah.
Do you think the tension is a lack of love for one another, or I think he means suspicion that she's a traitor? Well, so you have to remember, and this gets back to another point. I really appreciated that they kept mentioning Chandrila in this whole thing because, of course, that's Mon Mothma's home planet. But
Hmm.
it figures actually pretty heavily in Star Wars lore. Ben Solo was born there. It was a really important planet for Legends, New Republic stuff. So the fact that they basically held that to be Mon Mothma's planet is actually kind of cool. And of course, the marriages are arranged marriages.
Hmm.
And Mothma's marriage to Perrin is an arranged marriage. And I think that it may have started out to where maybe there was some hope there that, because a lot of times arranged marriages do end up actually working out and they form bonds and the whole shot.
Hmm.
This one, obviously not, though, because Mothma was dedicated. And I'm sure it was probably a lot better when they were still the Republic. But once it switched to the Empire, and now Mon's sort of at odds with what's going on, and she's holding on to this ideal and everything else, I think that put a strain on what was probably already a strained marriage, to be honest.
Yeah. I think Mothma, of course, she didn't want it for her daughter because probably one of all the stress that she's under, just being in an arranged marriage and seeing how that's worked out for her anyway.
Mm-hmm.
But she didn't want her daughter to be, she didn't want to sacrifice her daughter for this cause. And this is where, once again, I can't say enough the writing on this particular episode because briefly going back, the choices that you make as a writer is really what's important. To have that moment where Kino delivers this massive Independence Day type speech, right?
Mm-hmm.
Only for him to for what we believe to be killed off right after that. Was like kind of like anticlimactic, but it was still very moving and it moved that story even the more. Now we get into Mon Mothma's situation, and she's already under when you take into account all of that she has to deal with, she's trying to quietly do this rebellion thing. She doesn't have full control of the rebellion because Luthen is doing his own thing. She's kind of doing her thing. Her cousin's involved in this. And then now she's got her household that's kind of turned against her. She can't really doesn't know who to trust in the Senate, and all her constituents that she has to be around. She has to live a double life. She has to play this role of, oh yes, hi, this benevolent and this, almost like a flighty type senator, when really she's this architect of a whole rebellion behind closed doors. And then now she's in the situation where she's being forced to kind of deal with this criminal, where she doesn't want to get her hands too dirty, but she's realizing very quickly that to do these type of things, you have to get your hands dirty and get in bed with people you don't want to get in bed with. And then now, in order to even take this thing to the next level to accomplish the mission, she's in the situation where now she has to give up her daughter, basically, to this guy.
Yeah, Davos Skuldron, I think is his name. And
once again, the writing of that, it's
yeah.
just
well, and don't leave out this. When you're actually also talking about all that stuff that Mothma has to face, don't forget that even the other people she has to deal with, like the other architects of the rebellion, which would be Saw and Luthen, she's at odds with them too. It's like they can't even figure out how to do a rebellion unified, and so she's really by herself. Yeah. And I think that's why, part of why, Ronaldo said, how good is Mon Mothma? And then, of course, he goes on to say, it feels so good to have good dialogue in Star Wars. And, by the way, I hate Mothma's husband. Well, you're supposed to. You're supposed to. Yeah, I mean, that's, there might be a problem. I mean, it's kind of one of those things that, I mean, he's a cool character, but yeah, you can tell. But again, I think a lot of it, if you really put yourself in their situation, I think that you can understand a lot more his point of view and his perspective. I mean, sure, we look at it and go, okay, you're kind of a horrible person and all this stuff, but that's because we know Mon Mothma and we see the picture. But if you actually look at it from his perspective, it's a little bit different. Let's see what David's got for us here. He says, the series does a great job of pulling you into the rebellion. Those join the rebellion moments, the speeches, those points where they show why the rebellion is necessary, rise up and charge moments. Yeah, I mean, and I think that that's really what it's supposed to do, right? Because when you watch the original trilogy and then you watch some of the stuff that came out shortly after, I would say everything up through the prequels, because the prequels kind of showed you a little bit of where the rebellion was spawned from. I mean, it didn't really give you it gave you the very seeds, because there was actually that deleted scene from episode 3 where they showed Bail Organa, Padme, Mon Mothma all kind of talking about hey, we gotta. It was almost like they were talking about starting something, and you get a little bit in Rogue One, where you see a little bit of right before they were unified. But this is really where you're seeing a lot of how the rebellion is built and how messy it is, actually.
Yeah, it's one of those typical things where everybody sees the lifestyle of the rich and famous, and everybody's like, "Ooh, I want that." But no one sees the grubby work that you had to do to get there. And this is what you're getting right now in Andor, is the grubby work. You're seeing, okay, the stress that people are putting under, what their sacrifice, what they had to give up, so it's like we always see Mon Mothma as this, great poised leader, but how did she get there though? How did Leia become as strong as she has become? All these different things. And we all looked at the rebellion yeah, I will fight for the rebellion. And yeah, that's what it's supposed to make you feel on the macro level. But on the micro level, you're really starting to see okay, on a day to day, this is what people have to do even to get to the rebellion to even begin.
Mm-hmm.
So,
And you
that's
got
what this
the three
show does.
different
One,
right, but the
mhm.
three different points of view of the rebellion. Saw would do it
Right.
differently
So,
than Luthen. Luthen would do it differently than Mothma, and so
so on
on.
and so forth.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I mean, this is cool. And then speaking of Luthen, of course, I mean, oh man, the speech that he gives at the end even made Kino's speech, it dwarfed it by comparison. I mean, it was a long speech too. And
Yeah.
I mean,
Kudos,
first of all,
kudos for him for memorizing those lines.
yeah, right. I know. I mean, maybe he had them taped up all over the place, like in the. But it is interesting
Right.
though that because there was a fan theory going around that Deidre was actually a rebel mole. And how
Hmm.
interesting is it that it's actually Lonnie Jung that's the mole, or
Hmm.
Young actually, Lonnie Young. So I thought that was cool because he kind of had that whole like Fulcrum vibe going. I mean, it kind of reminded
Yeah.
me of a little bit of what was that guy's name? The original Fulcrum, not when Ahsoka took over. I know somebody will chat it in soon.
You talking about the guy that was
With the
in
big
the Empire?
sideburns and yeah,
Oh, um,
Callus.
Callus. Yeah.
Yeah, Callus. I knew it was something where it was a little on the nose, But so he was the guy, that was first. I remember when that whole thing hit in Rebels, where you're just like, no way. And then of course they kind of repeated it again, that same formula in Rise of Skywalker.
Mm-hmm.
When they made oh my goodness.
Hux.
Yes, thank you. I'm like, wow, has it really come to this? Yeah, when they made Hux, when they actually made Huxamol, I'm like, whoa, I did not see that coming. Same thing with Lonnie
Yeah.
here. Before we get into it, though, Ronaldo sets it up. I think Luthen had the better speech in this. Yes. Love Kino's, but I think Luthen wins. Hands down, Luthen wins. Although you do have to feel sorry for Lonnie, though, because, I mean,
This poor guy.
having a daughter and all that stuff, he was right, but I'll bet you, like, 4 sentences into Luthen's speech, he probably regretted going, oh, yeah, well, what have you sacrificed? Because it's just like, oh.
Mm-hmm.
Our stream
Yeah.
kicks back in. There we go. Now it's back. Yes. I'm sure there was like a little bit of that people missed because our stream seemed to have skipped a little bit, but we're back. We're good. Yeah. So I mean, Luthen definitely hit the whole thing home when he gave that whole speech, and it's just so crazy to think about because honestly, his speech puts everything into perspective. It puts the entire experience of really what it's like to be a rebel. I mean, that's one of the things that not only was it an excellently written speech by the writers, but it literally put everything into perspective of, hey, this is what it actually means to be a rebel. We don't really see that in the original trilogy or anything. But man, you really get the perspective, the down and dirty perspective when Luthen gives that speech.
Yeah, I mean, you kind of have to remind, and that's the thing that a lot of that you see what happens along the way with the rebels. You saw it happen with Mon Mothma several times, Luthen, um, Cassian, and things. You have to remind people of your why. Like,
Yeah.
why are we doing this? Why am I here? This is, you have to look beyond yourself and what are you willing to sacrifice to get that, to achieve it. And this is one of those things where it's like, okay, the stakes are on the line. And for Luthen to tell him, like, look, man, we can't let you go. Like, you're too vital. Like, you just have to go back. And it's kind of heartbreaking because it's like, yeah, man, and the fact that they're even threatening his kid, like, oh yeah, it's a
I
nice little
know.
baby girl. Like, and when you kind of hear, it's like, okay, they're kind of sick, sadistic, like, look, don't try. We know where your daughter is. We will do what we got to do. that's how committed he is. And that's when
Mm-hmm.
he's like, look, I'm willing even to sacrifice your child for this. I don't care. It has to happen. It has to work.
Yeah.
And we're too far in, you know what I mean? It's working. You just got to go play your role. And he's not trying to be a jerk. He doesn't want to be, but he will if he has to. And
Yeah.
that's the cost, of doing, this type of work, unfortunately, is that you have to be willing to get your hands dirty. And so uh Saul understands that. Luthen understands that. Mothma is the one that's slowly coming into, but she's resisting it. But eventually she's gonna have to come to the realization that look, as the Joker would once say, you can't make an omelet without breaking some eggs. You
Yeah, I think
have to do it.
I think she's slowly getting it. Ronaldo says, I mean, Luthen is not a bad guy, but he's capable of doing really bad things for the rebellion.
Absolutely.
And that's where Andor was at in Rogue One.
Mhm.
You saw that in like the first scene or whatever. So I think that, now of course David comes in and says, what? Keynote speech was movie magic, the battle cry of the century, and in real life he's a voice actor. Real life he's a voice. So just don't make the mistake of letting a lot of these outside influences, because now what you're doing is you're kind of bringing in, the real world. Oh, look, Andy Serkis was the voice of Snoke, and he did the Planet of the Apes capture, and he's, this amazing guy, and all that. You got to look at it from strictly a story perspective and what it's giving you about the story.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's one of those things like you have to really look at it for what it is. I mean, don't get me wrong, like they're both
Oh yeah, I mean, Kino's speech was incredible. It's one of the best in Star Wars,
yeah,
franchise.
history, honestly.
But
Yeah.
the Luthen speech, though, really cuts to the core of what it means to be something that we've never really been introduced to. In fact, it actually starts to color what you think of Han, Luke, and Leia and what they're... I mean, you really understand from their perspective, what's going on and really what's happening. Whereas, Kino's speech, as excellent as it was and as great as it is, I mean, let's face it, it's just another... I mean, I don't want to dismiss it, but...
this way. Yeah, and I know where you're going.
You know where I'm going.
It's one of those things like this. There's a difference from, I'm using a sports analogy. There's a difference when a coach gives you a halftime speech to go back in the second half and win the game. That's keynote speech. Because after the game is over, it's over, right? It's another thing when your coach is instilling in you, reminding you like, okay, football is or basketball or whatever is more than just a game. This is things that you need for life. This is so you take those lessons with you beyond the game. That's what Luthen's speech was. It was more like this goes beyond just okay, what you have to do. You don't understand that this is going to impact so much more than what you can possibly fathom or realize. This is why you have to do it. Versus Kino's thing is just like it's more contained to like, okay, we got to fight to get out of here. And they're not gonna, and it's just a motivating tool to get you out of this one particular situation. Whereas Luthen's speech was more for everybody. It's not just about you. It's about everybody that's gonna benefit from this. So to me, that's kind of like the bigger difference between the two.
I'll actually piggyback on that analogy because there's another way that you can spin that too, right? Using the exact same analogy. So, Kino's speech was kind of like more of an external. It's the halftime, hey, we need you to change your strategy, do this, do that, go out and win this game. It's external. It's the coach driving the players to try to achieve a certain objective. which is basically what Kino was doing. The Luthen speech would be like if the coach started giving his own personal experiences on why he's a coach, what he had to give up to get there, what the players had to give up to get there, all the hard work, and reminding them internally of what's going on and everything. That's really what it comes down to.
Yeah, exactly.
You know,
Absolutely.
It's not just a speech to drive a particular objective. It's this is why we're doing this. You know? So David then goes on to say, Kino's speech was a barking at a room full of cues at Founders Day. You know?
Yes, David. That's true. That is. I would probably agree with you on that.
But again,
it's contained though. But that's what I'm saying. It's a contained thing. Whereas,
but I don't want to take anything away from it at the same time. It's just that when you compare it, and again, this is a very rare thing because you don't usually get two amazing speeches in an entire series, much less in the same episode. If we're dealing with television.
Oh yeah, no. Absolutely.
I mean, if we're dealing with films, and you could say the same thing, but like in an entire franchise, much less in the same movie. You know, so I mean, just both of them, it just kind of knocks it out of the park. So, all right, so we'll go into our final thoughts here.
Yeah.
Yeah, let's go ahead and do the final thoughts on this episode.
Amazing. The writing was spot on. It really resonated in this particular episode. The acting by Andy Serkis was tremendous. His facial expressions, I mean, you can see why he's one of the best mocap actors, just because of the passion in which not only does he speak with, but he also has the emotion in his face. Really pushed a lot of things home. I don't want, and I don't want to gloss over Mon Mothma's situation either, because although we talk about Luthen's great speech, and don't get me wrong, like that was phenomenal as well, as we just kind of dissected. But Mon Mothma, the turmoil that you see from her character, that she has to deal with, and her response to it, like you can see the shaking or the quivering in her lips, because she's realizing I have to be willing to go chips all in, and that's a hard thing you're trying to ask of a mother, and it's just so much for her. So everybody brought it, like every actor, main actor brought their A game, from Luthen, Kino, Andor, Mothma. It was just a smorgasbord of amazing writing, and I was really in this. To me, was this episode shorter?
Yes, not by
It was
much,
shorter.
but it was like 42 minutes or something.
Yeah, it felt a little bit. Yeah,
instead of the usual 54,
57.
55, 57. Yeah, it was a little bit shorter.
Yeah, but they did so much within that compact amount of time.
Not only did they do a lot, but the episode breathed. I mean, the last episode was longer, but it was so disjointed. I mean, don't get me wrong, it was good, but I mean, that was one of the problems I had with it, though. So what are you going to give it as an overall rating? I can speak.
I'm going to give this one a 9. This has to be in the 9 realm. Now, and the only reason why I'm saying 9 and not 10 is because it's like, all right, I haven't seen the last 2 episodes, and I feel like, not to say that you can't have multiple 10s episodes as well.
You can, but I mean, my whole thing with the 10 rating, to me, a 10 is a flawless episode.
Yeah,
and I wouldn't necessarily go flawless.
Yeah, like it's flawless. Exactly.
I mean, you got to reserve a 10. You got to reserve a 10. Yeah. So you're going to give it a 9. I'm also giving it a 9. Pretty much all the same reasons. I mean, I hate cheesing on. It's not why give this thing to you first, so I could just go, yep, same thing. Okay, no, I mean, but this time I really don't have a whole lot to add, honestly. I mean, I like the pacing. I like the structure of the episode. I like the fact that they didn't drag it out. I like the fact that they didn't feel the need, which is something that I like about the show overall. You don't have to check up on every character in every episode. And I love the fact that this show understands that. I love the fact that this is written as, finally, we get a genre series that just happens to be set in the Star Wars universe. And so, again, I would use this show as basically a gateway series. And this is one of the better episodes of the show, to be honest. In fact, I'm even going to say this may be my favorite episode of the season. I might actually go that far, because I don't know if I've given another episode a 9. Usually I hover somewhere between like 7 and 8.5 or something, But like you said, maybe the finale does that. Now, to that end, of course, a couple of our people chatting weighed in, as we hope that you guys do. And of course, if you're watching the rebroadcast of this, leave your rating in the comment section and give us a little thought about what you did or didn't like about the episode. Ronaldo actually gives it a 9.5. Says, okay. I loved it. It was great. David gives it a 9. And of course he says, because hey, it's no Fast and Furious.
Oh God.
Well, but here's the thing though. I mean, not to actually fizzle out your whole joke or whatever, but the first Fast and Furious movie was amazing. A lot of times people forget that, when you talk about the Fast and Furious movies now, you kind of think of the last 3 or 4 of them where it's basically Mission Impossible in cars. First Fast and Furious movie was like a crime drama. In fact, the car thing was even secondary. It's centered in that culture, but it wasn't showing a ton of stunts the whole time, other than when they were actually ripping off trucks and stuff. So, from a certain standpoint, I would actually give the first Fast and Furious movie an 8 or 9. So, not to kind of destroy the whole tone of your joke or anything, but hey. All right, so now, of course, we get to the point in the episode where, and of course I'll start with you. You guys can chat your version of this in too. What do you want to see now for episode 11?
Where does Andor go from here? What's his next move? Does he link up? How does he link up with Luthen? Does he find out anything about his mom and Bix? That's the other thing too, that it was kind of, things were kind of I don't say foreshadowed, but that the other girl in the whole,
oh yeah,
so there was my Martha's niece, but then
Cinta, I thought you were talking about Cinta.
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about.
No, you're talking about, if you're talking about Mothma's cousin, that's Vel.
No, I'm talking about her lover,
Cinta,
which would be Cinta.
That would be Cinta. Yep.
Yeah,
they did show her a couple times. But there's a couple of scenes that we actually didn't talk about or touch on, because there really wasn't anything happening. But yeah, I did wonder about that too. Like, they made a point to show Cinta
kind of milling around, and it's like, okay, what's up with that? And then Cyril and Deidre, like, we didn't really get them this episode, but I want to see more of that budding situation.
Yeah, do we have a Deidre on our hands? They like to combine the names. Yeah, mine pretty much, my 3 pretty much almost echo yours. Like you, I want to see what's next for Cassian, because now it's pretty much open-ended, and we know that he has to float ever closer to the rebellion, because each season is 12 episodes. So we really only have like 14 episodes until, and that's until Rogue One. So at some point he's got to be in the rebellion, because by the time of Rogue One, not only is he pretty firmly in the rebellion, he's high up in the rebellion. Like, he's Mon Mothma's main, like, enforcer or something. So, I want to see how that works. I want to see if Mon Mothma is going to introduce Davo's son to her daughter, Ledra, or Ledra, whatever. Because that is an interesting dynamic, because like you've brought up several times in this episode, I think that she is going to be like, all right, you're going to have to take one for the team, you know? So I want to see if that happens in the next episode. Because remember, this is going to be the next, are going to be a 2-episode arc. So, you know, this was the final episode of the prison trilogy. Now we're moving into a new story arc, which will comprise the finale, which is kind of a 2-part thing. And then, of course, you were talking about Deidre and Cyril, which, of course, I would like to see that too. But I want to see if Deidre finds out about Cassian's escape. And does she connect that? I mean, obviously, she's going to hear about this prison break. I'm sure of it. However, is she going to somehow, like, is that going to be detached from Cassian? Or is she going to find out? Because remember, Cassian was in prison. They've been looking for this guy. He's been under their noses the whole time, and they didn't even know. So now that he's gone, if they start looking into the roster and all that, are they going to be like, oh, man? We had this guy the whole time. So, you know, that'll be interesting. All right, so let me get to these last few chats here. First, Ronaldo starts us off by saying, unpopular opinion. First Fast and Furious is awful. So my question, though, would be this. Are you really into the later movies? Because if you think the whole franchise sucked, okay, then it was just a series that didn't appeal to you. But if you start coming up with, hey, I thought Fast and Furious 8 or 9 or Hobbs and Shaw or whatever were amazing, that puts it into a little bit more perspective, because then I can understand why you might hate the first one, because the first one, you know, if you come into the Fast and Furious, let's just say you started with like 8 or something, and then you go and watch 1, you're going to be disappointed. You know, you're going to be like, whoa, what is this? But turning back to the show, Ronaldo says, it's hard to see where we can go from here. But maybe Andor will try to return to Ferrix. I have to think that maybe that is what happens, because they keep, you said yourself with Cinta, they keep going back to Ferrix and they keep showing us what's going on there. But they don't show us anything. It's almost like they're using it as some sort of weird establishing thing, you know?
Well, that's where Bix is. You know, Bix is still on Ferrix.
Yeah.
And
well, but I mean, Bix, the last we saw her, she was just like in prison there.
Right. But that's what I'm saying. Like, you know, he was trying to go back to get his mom.
Yeah.
So
oh yeah, you know, before he was detained or whatever. But then we'll see. David says, I want to see Deidre get her groove back. I want to see the greatest of all time. I want to see Mon Mothma's family reveal their true intent. Well, and I get that, because it really depends on if Mothma's family is secretly being, I guess, like moles or whatever for the Empire. You know, whether they're in on spying on her, kind of like her driver is. I don't think so. You know, I think that they're just showing, hey, man, this is like a typical senator's family. Basically, you know, Perrin and the daughter, they basically have drank the Kool-Aid that the Empire is handing out. Mothma's not, but she has to kind of pretend that she's towing the line here. So, and then, yes, as I suspected, Ronaldo says, I'd love the later movies. Yep, from 5 and up. And that is why you think 1 is terrible. See, the world makes sense now. I mean, not necessarily agree, but don't get me wrong. I actually do like a lot of the later Fast and Furious movies. Like, I really love 7. You know, 1 through 5, well, really, like 1 and 2 were kind of the more grounded actual movies, right? 3, 4, and 5 were probably what they should have gotten up to and not exceeded. 6 is where they started going the whole Mission Impossible route, towards started getting kind of crazy.
It's getting
7 I
goofy.
thought was really good, but 8 and 9, man, that now they're just like really over the. When you got like submarines and stuff chasing cars, and it's just like, okay. But don't get me wrong, I enjoy watching them. It's just you just can't compare. You just can't call it a real. It's a popcorn, fun, entertaining movie.
Yeah.
Whereas the first ones, I think, were
Story driven.
Yeah. So that basically concludes our Fast and Furious podcast for the evening. But David's got a comment in here. He wants to keep us on. Apparently, he says, "Really? They really seem to be against Mon Mothma and more than just family drama. The husband seems very suspicious of her actions. You think differently?" Not necessarily, but you have to understand that what the Empire is really doing versus what it looks like they're doing. You have to remember that the Empire is essentially the Republic. Okay, but to the average citizen, including Mothma's family, they're the rightful government. They're squashing out terrorism. They're doing the right thing. Sure, they're increasing a little bit more rules and things like that, but like all fascist governments, they're promising peace and safety, right? It's kind of like, look, you're safe under us. I mean, if anybody gets out of line at all, they're going to be squashed. But what, of course, they don't see is all the atrocities that are being committed, and that's what Mothma sees. But her husband and daughter just seem to be kind of two things. One, they think that Mothma's part of which basically is, I mean, the Senate is a formality at this point. They don't have any real power, and that's one of the things that her daughter was pointing out. It's like, look, you think you're over there doing something. It's like a meaningless job now. And the husband is basically like, look, we're rich, we're wealthy, let's enjoy life. And what are you doing? Why are you, why are you out all the time? Why are you trying to do all this stuff?
Yeah, why are you fighting so hard when,
right? What's the point? And so I don't necessarily think that they're moles or anything like that, because I think that they're just, it's sort of a difference of opinion. They just don't understand why Mothma's all activist crazy or something, and they're like, what are you doing?
Yeah. Exactly.
But at the same time, though, I do understand David's point, because I thought the same thing myself, where it's like, but are they watching her? Is somebody getting to them to say, hey, pay closer attention? It's hard to say at this point. Let's just put it like that. It's hard to say at this point. I wouldn't rule it out. I don't think so, but I wouldn't rule it out. So join us Monday, because Monday live at 8, we're going to continue reviewing the Tales of the Jedi series, which is an animated show that we all know that Daryl actually likes. I mean, I say that like you hate every one of them, right? It's really only Visions that was kind of hard to get through. I mean, Bad Batch.
Well, it was Resistance. I still haven't gotten through that, but yeah.
Yeah, but we never tried to review that.
Thank God.
But, Tales of the Jedi was really good. If you guys, first of all, if you missed any of our Andor reviews, go back and check it out. We got them all in a playlist organized nicely for you for Andor Season 1. And we're about to review Tales of the Jedi Episode 3. Now, of course, the difference is you've already watched all 6 of them. There's 6 of them, right?
Yep.
Okay, so you've watched all 6 of them. I'm actually watching them as they come up for review. So there is a little bit of that difference. But other than that, we're reviewing one episode at a time. We are on Tales of the Jedi Episode 3, which we're going to bring to you guys Monday night at 8 live, where you can chat with us. And if you missed the first 2, shouldn't be a surprise. We have another playlist that you guys can check out. So be sure to check out the other 2 Tales of the Jedi reviews that we did before you check out 3. And hopefully you guys are watching that show so you can participate and chat with us and we can talk about it. All right? Well, I think that's going to do it for us tonight.
Yes, sir.
So with that, I'm Eric Vansel.
I'm Daryl Sanders.
May the Force be with you.
Always.
Head to Head, a Star Wars podcast. Be sure to follow us on Twitter @HeadToHeadSW. Submit your questions for our next show. visit our official website at headtoheadswpodcast.com. Until next time, may the Force be with you, always.